So I was 13 years old, and I was standing in front of our fridge, and my mom had just put up this piece of paper with a list of foods that my dad couldn't eat. He was just diagnosed with chronic kidney disease, and they had just come home from the doctor, and this was a list the doctor gave him. And I was looking at it, and I was reading it, and on the list was meat, beans, eggs, nuts, grains, bananas, milk, cheese, salt, squash, broccoli, carrots, potatoes, and other root vegetables, tomatoes, spinach, okra, beets, artichokes, nuts and seeds, avocados, bananas, dried fruits, papaya, pomegranate, oranges, mangoes, nectarines, honeydew, kiwi, cantaloupe, apricots, and even chocolate. I looked at the list and I thought, what could he eat? And I thought of my dad. My dad loved food. My dad brought us to fancy restaurants every week. My dad, when his idea of taking me out for a happy meal at 5 years old was eating sushi before it was normal or cool. And his best present to me was this encyclopedia of world cuisine. And I thought, could there be a worse disease my dad could have? And so, absent of any other guidance, my mom was just feeling helpless and hopeless. And so we just continued to eat the way we usually do. And because it seemed like my dad couldn't eat anything, and my mom was just given up, basically. And so, we would eat meals together, and I would look at my dad, and I would think, he can't eat that. He's killing himself. And I was frustrated. So I went to the bookstore, and I looked at all the cookbooks, and this was the Philippines 20 years ago. There was no paleo or special diet cookbooks. There was just one special diet cookbook, and it was this book. It was the most uninspired, bland cookbook I could find in the bookstore. And it's a diabetic cookbook. It's 200 delicious recipes for a low-fat, low-sugar, low-cholesterol, low-salt diet. Yum. And I was 13, and I read through the whole thing, and I followed each recipe to the letter. And they were horrible. And I remember this one in particular. The moment my dad and I were eating it, it was baked fish with mustard sauce, and the ingredients included margarine and instant non-fat dry milk. And my dad would eat the food that I would cook, and I would eat it with him in solidarity, against this lifeless food. But I knew he wasn't happy. And after a while, that kind of faded away, and he went back to eating what he wanted to eat. And he finally passed away from kidney disease. And while food was not a smoking gun, I always thought to myself, maybe if I was better at cooking healthy food, I could have saved my dad. And so, I forgot about all that. But in my 20s, I got very, very ill. And my body was racked with this pain that the doctors couldn't understand. And so they gave me pills for the symptoms. And the pills caused other symptoms that they gave me pills for, so those pills caused other symptoms, and then it was just pills and pills for days with no end in sight. Until one day I said, this is not gonna work. So I started researching on the internet, which was new then, and I read all these crazy things I kept on reading, crazy things that said that, when we eat healthy food, we actually get healthy. And so I said, wow. And then I thought about my dad and that stupid list on the fridge, and I said, all right, I'm going to teach myself how to cook healthy food and change my own health. And I learned how to cook because I didn't want to feel sorry for myself with every meal, and I certainly did not want to cook from this cookbook. And so I started to eat vegetables and fruits and the things that we're told to eat, and I started feeling better. And then I started losing the pills because the symptoms weren't there anymore. And then I started feeling the best I've ever felt my entire life. And then I remembered my dad, and I thought of him, and I thought of all of us. You know, cancer, diabetes, heart disease. If food could change the quality of our lives, why are we not saving ourselves? And then I remembered, and I realized that, you know, doctors get less than 20 hours of nutrition education over 4 years. But even more importantly, advertisers spend billions of dollars telling us that we don't have time to cook, that if we labor in the kitchen, we're being too hard on ourselves, that you shouldn't spend money on vegetables because for $1, you could get a burger, French fries, and a big vat of soda. You know, how can carrots stand up to that? You have to peel them and chop them and cook them, jeez. You know, and then, you know, there's pills for the pain and the gas. And then it clicked. And then I became this crazy person who talks about vegetables all the time. You know, I called myself a veg hacker. And then I started writing about vegetables, and so much so, and talking about vegetables so much so that, as Aurora said, you know, when I would run into people at the grocery store, they would hide their cart. And now I find myself, you know, feel like a Robin Hood of sorts. You know, I've started a movement of people that rescue fruits and vegetables, really good food, from going to the dumpster and redirecting it to those who need it the most, because everyone deserves to be healthy. And after years of therapy, you know, I realized that, you know, maybe I do what I do because I try to do for everyone else what I failed to do for my dad.